On the east coast of England, on the very edge of the North Sea, lies Bempton, a small, unassuming village with a population just over 1,000 people. And despite the area's innocent appearance, strange things happen beneath its thin veneer of normality. In this place, every type of unexplained phenomena has been seen. Those that know say nothing, while those that don't remain blissfully unaware. Filmmaker Chris Turner, along with investigative journalist and author Paul Sinclair, have joined forces in an attempt to uncover the truth about this mysterious stretch of coastline. Paul has been researching Bempton and its surrounding towns and villages for nearly 20 years. In the last 2 years, Paul's research and his methodology have been noticed internationally. He now regularly gives interviews or radio shows and podcasts about his research. Because of this, the area itself is now becoming known all over the world as somewhat of a hotspot for ufologists and paranormal researchers alike.
I think one of the most difficult parts of all this, is gaining people's trust. You're asking them to talk about things that most people will ridicule, mainstream won't accept. And these small, close-knit communities also don't accept outsiders readily. And that's essentially what I am. And I'm asking them to tell me some personal details of something very unusual that they've seen, that they haven't got an explanation for, things that many times they'd rather forget. But I need to get that information out of them if I'm going to put it into the books and put it to other people in a way that they can probably understand or accept. But these people are very, very distrusting. And the trawler community, it's so difficult. It's almost like mining communities. They're all singular. And all you've got to do is just be as honest as you can with these people and assure them that they're going to have anonymity if that's what they require.
I think the farmers, and I think people in general, just people out walking, the public, I think a lot of them have seen things that they won't talk about, which makes our job increasingly difficult. It's really hard when you know that somebody knows and they won't tell you. It's sort of but at the same time, that's really what keeps Paul and I going, looking further into this mystery. But we know that animals are being lost up and down the country. We know that there's a lot more missing people in Britain, and in fact all over the world, than is publicly disclosed. Keeping what's happening up at Bempton and in places like it all over the world secret is paramount to the government, because I think it demonstrates that they're just not in control, and that's the last thing that they want the public to know.
The majority of Paul's research is feet-on-the-ground research. In the case of the animal mutilations happening in an area dubbed the UK Skinwalker Ranch, Chris and Paul have spent many evenings hoping to catch a glimpse of the phenomena for the documentary. But it's almost like the phenomena, whatever form it might take, is playing games with them.
We're just placing one of the cameras here in this little culvert that in winter gets flooded, and this drains the water off the land. And we have seen just now game using this, so we're hoping that, this is really predominantly for the alien cat, really, and any other strange, because the strange cryptid animals have been seen in this area. It's a long shot, but we've got to do the thermal, we've got to do the trail cams, we've got to do the night vision. We've got even old school wind-on flash cameras, so we've got analog, digital. We're just throwing everything we can at it.
Throw everything we can at it, Chris, and that's all we can do. At various places in this wood we've set 4 trail cams, which we're going to leave here for 3 days, get back to them, and hopefully we might have a result. I think we might be unlucky as well, but nobody can blame us for trying.
No.
Anybody who's familiar with the work and the research that I do will know that a lot of it is boots on the ground research, face-to-face interviews. Very little of my work is done on the internet, although I do see a place for work on the internet. But during this period when the animals' fatalities were at their peak, Chris Turner came through several times. And we 3 and 4 day sessions where we were out in the field doing the investigative work. On one occasion we used a Geiger counter, and we'd walked about with this thing, actively trying to find some evidence of the strange and unusual, and nothing happened. However, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks prior to Chris arriving, I'd found, amongst other things, a deer carcass, and it were killed in unusual circumstances, let's just say. Almost like it had, whatever had happened to it had gone from the inside out. The only thing that I could see that was missing was half of its liver. Now obviously the deer had long since gone. You know, Chris arrived 5 or 6 weeks later and we were in process of this investigation, and I just said to him, I said, it was under that kind of overhanging hedge that we found the deer. And the Geiger counter's on, it starts to rise. There's a circular dial on this thing and it slowly just built up, and it got to what would have been considered dangerous levels. The deer had long since gone, but we were in that location. Bearing in mind we'd had one bit of activity on the Geiger counter, which I'll touch on in a moment, earlier in the week.
4 days, that investigation went on for 4 days with the trail cams, all the kit that we had taken up there. And we had barely just your standard base readings on this Geiger counter. And then all of a sudden, as Paul suspected, we went into the woodland under this sort of foliage where Paul had found the deer, only to get a major reading. 6 weeks later, there's a residue radiation there, which is highly unusual. And the chance that it's a coincidence of faulty equipment is, again, I'm just not having that.
We've looked at all things that are present, and the light forms are present when a lot of these unexplained events are happening. And the nature of it, these fields where the livestock's being killed are very close to the North Sea, where the lights are being seen. So, do we connect A to B? I don't know. We've no proof that the light has been over one of these animals and done that. But it's got to be considered. The human element, I think we've thrown that out of the window. We looked at the satanic cult, but it's gone. It was there, it was happening, but I don't think that any of that is responsible for what's taking place up there.
So the question of whether the deer and the animal incidents are related to those amber-coloured, amber gamblers, they call them. Some people, certainly, I think Barry Fitzgerald over in Ireland, they call them amber gamblers. Across the world, they've probably got lots of different names. Foo Fighters would be one of the names, but certainly the orange lights that we see in the fields and over the oceans there. So, are they connected to the animals? Well, Elaine would say, who's one of the witnesses in bringing down the lights, said that when she was driving a car and came upon the deer in the road, they were being herded by these 10 of these amber orb lights. And she incidentally had missing time in that incident. So I suspect that they are linked to the deer. We can't prove it. If I had to make an educated guess, I would say that they are connected.
These events and these cryptids and this phenomena just is so random on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's almost like it's playing a game with you. We go up there time and time again and waiting to catch. We took every instrument you could take. We had thermal, we had night vision, we had old school wind-on cameras, infrared, audio equipment. You know, nothing happens, absolutely nothing happens. And then you take your eye off it and boom, something happens.
As I previously said earlier in the week, we'd been on the cliff tops, walking along between the old RAF base and the North Sea, the cliff top path, once again using the Geiger counter, as well as other things, EMF meters, tri-field meters, and little to no success until we got directly in line with the back of the base, where I think there's 21 standing stones that used to be the plinth for a huge radar mast back in I think the 1950s, when RAF Bempton was a secret military installation, and there was a program that they were running called Project Winkle, and these stones were the plinth for this huge mast. Regardless of the location, the Geiger counter started to rise in that area, which was interesting. There's nothing there. Just like where the deer carcass was found, there's no electrical activity, there's no buildings, there's nothing that could radiate that amount of radiation. You know, wherever it was coming from, wherever the source was coming from, it was unknown and totally unexpected.
We're at the top of Bempton, near the RAF Bempton.
We're not faking this or making this do anything it shouldn't be doing.
Jesus, what the
There's something happening here.
what the
What the... Bleep.
what the
What's it reading?
It's now reading over 300 and it's flying up. This is ridiculous. Oh, what the f*** is going on here?
I don't know. Is it levelling off? Oh no.
Now, the incident outside Bempton base with the Gargant is highly unusual. If you look at the readings there, 480, I think the reading was, that is extremely dangerous over a prolonged period of time, and there's no reason that that should be occurring. So there could be a number of reasons for this, and this is all speculation. And the first one is that the Geiger counter is faulty. The first, is the Geiger counter faulty? Well, the Geiger counter has worked fine since. It worked fine for 4 days. The only time it flared up with obscure readings was in 2 places that are considered highly unusual. So the second one is that they're beneath Bempton at one time, potentially, maybe they were storing nuclear weapons and there's some sort of residue there. But again, this doesn't happen all the time, because upon our return with a Geiger counter, a few hours later, that reading didn't occur. So was there something in and around Paul and I that evening? We speculate it could have been some sort of false craft. Wild speculation, of course, but what can cause a reading like that? Massively high readings, dangerous readings, according to the charts that I've observed and the people that I've spoken to about radiation. So to be reading, over 480, I think, is wild, really. So what that means, what it meant, what was going on at the time, I don't know. I certainly think Paul and I didn't realise the significance of that at the time.
Over the years, strange military vehicles have been seen parked around the village and along the coastline. Paul has been told that these vehicles are there to monitor. Question is, just what are they monitoring? As ever, just when things had gone quiet, Paul received a phone call from a man claiming to have worked for the MOD in the 1980s.
And during the course of this investigation, we were contacted by a guy who told us that he'd worked for the military, and his job primarily just involved walking up and down these areas of high strangeness with expensive photographic equipment, which was all provided for him, trying to obtain evidence of the strange and unusual. He talked about portal areas. He talked about, I think he said, 2 different types of alien beings that were visiting the area. Once again, we've only got this guy's word for this, but it's interesting nevertheless that this came in during this research. And we're not talking about anything new here. These reports, these accounts go back decades and decades and decades. And I would think that the animal fatalities go back that far as well. And almost in clusters where you'll get a spate of these things happening for sometimes up to 2 years, and then it just drops off the face of the earth. There's nothing happening at all. It's really difficult.
The Ministry of Defence witness who was employed up there at Bempton, who contacted Paul privately during the making of the film, he contacted Paul and said that he'd been working up there as an employee up there to essentially as reconnaissance. So I think he was only a young man at the time, maybe 18, 20. His job was to be up at the cliff tops and to observe the phenomena, observe people up there, anything unusual. That was his sole purpose up there, and all he was paid to do was to observe the phenomena. And he insists that the MOD and the military are fully aware of what is going on up at Bempton, and I find it hard to think that they're not, realistically. The amount of strange phenomena up there has to be linked in some way to potentially, maybe it is that magnetic anomaly. I know the magnetic anomaly is out at sea, but we don't know what effect that has on the area surrounding it. If we look at other places in the world, look at the Bermuda Triangle, that magnetic anomaly spreads a long way and has a lot of significant effects. Now, as it happens, the trawlermen only tend to be affected by that magnetic anomaly when they're over and around it out at sea. But there is something about that magnetic anomaly that is responsible for some of this phenomenon. I'm certain of that. It's too much of a coincidence to suggest that it's not.
So if I was asked where I would go to do research of this nature, looking into the strange and unusual, I would say Bempton, Speeton and Flamborough. It gets a lot of footfall during the daytime, during the summer months, but during the evenings, during the nights, there's nobody there at all. And during the winter time, even in the daytime, it gets very little footfall. You're on the edge of the North Sea. It truly is a land of the strange and unusual, offering the full spectrum of unexplained phenomena, from the light form phenomena, what I've called the ILFs, the intelligent light forms, to strange phenomena that shouldn't really fit in with what we would term as unexplained phenomena. Squares, cubes of light are being seen, animal fatalities, missing people, and whilst we must never say that UFOs or some kind of strange cryptid creature is responsible for the disappearance of people, because that would be unfair, we can also never discount the fact that these people have gone missing in unusual circumstances in an area where highly unusual things happen. So that has to be noted. It's the full spectrum of unexplained phenomena that's taking place in and around these locations.